Hey folks, Erick Stakelbeck here. Welcome to the Watchman Newscast live stream on this Friday, December 1st, 2023 is almost in the books. Hard to believe, and the wars and rumors of wars continue to intensify. They've picked up this year, needless to say, and this year is closing in a very, very dark way, I guess you would say. As we stay optimistic, we look forward to hopefully a brighter future. We know God's on the throne, and yet we also know that these birth pangs will intensify in the months to come. So where are we right now? What is the state of play in Israel? We came to you yesterday and we told you, look, the truce, this mini truce, as I called it, was ongoing. That is now off. Hamas has officially broken that 7-day ceasefire with Israel that saw dozens of Israeli hostages and some foreign nationals as well released from Hamas captivity. There are still some 130, a little bit more than that perhaps, hostages in Hamas's clutches. But look, Hamas overnight began firing rockets at Israel once again, effectively ending this ceasefire. I would argue, folks, that Hamas ended the ceasefire yesterday when it claimed responsibility for a heinous and deadly terror attack in Jerusalem. 4 people were killed in that Hamas terror attack. The 3 terrorists, thankfully, were neutralized afterwards, but 4 people killed, at least 6 more wounded. And Hamas proudly and gleefully accepted responsibility, said we were behind this in the aftermath of that deadly attack. So I would argue, and I said it on yesterday's live stream, that the ceasefire was broken yesterday, and Hamas really made it official, obviously, with these rocket barrages that began last night. Excuse me, they have continued today targeting southern Israel. Of course, in the immediate area surrounding the Gaza Strip, Hamas's power base, but also targeting central Israel. Alarms going off, rocket sirens going off in central Israel as far as Tel Aviv, as Hamas renews these barrages. And you may ask yourself, well, just how many rockets does Hamas have left? Good question. The IDF has made a major dent since October 7th in weakening Hamas's supply and neutralizing its supply in the run-up. Well, number one, we've got the airstrikes. And by the way, the IDF, this thing is back in full swing, the war. The IDF has carried out today, Friday, December 1st, at least 200 airstrikes against Hamas targets. That's one facet to this, obviously, in weakening the Hamas rocket onslaught, but also, of course, Israel's Iron Dome missile defense system has once again proven highly effective in shooting down those incoming rockets. But look, Hamas has a good deal, no clear number, 1,000 still, no doubt, of those rockets left. And folks, you have to believe that they have held a good chunk of them in reserve for their final stand. Because as I mentioned a minute ago, the IDF, before this truce kicked in on Thanksgiving Day last week, the IDF had incredible momentum and really making major strides towards that stated goal of eliminating Hamas and crushing this demonic death cult once and for all. We'll see. Now that things are picking back up, we'll see if that momentum was affected, if there are any setbacks here for the IDF. The IDF was a well-oiled, focused machine in the run-up to the ceasefire. I believe they will continue to be exactly that, but you have to be concerned that over the past 7 days, Hamas has regrouped, perhaps replenished some of its arsenal and supplies. Perhaps some Hamas leaders have even fled the Gaza Strip. We just don't know. Have they hardened their hiding places, been able to booby trap, do reconnaissance, surveillance of IDF troops who are in Gaza? A lot of questions here, and we're about to find out as, again, the ceasefire is over. Although, as we'll chat about in a minute, the Biden administration and other actors in the so-called international community are all in on starting the truce back up, number one. And number two, folks, let's be honest, the ultimate goal here, and the Biden administration would be thrilled about this if they could attain this right now, is a permanent ceasefire where Israel prematurely would agree to a ceasefire and allow Hamas to live to fight another day. I don't think it's going to happen. If it did, it would be an unfathomable disaster for the state of Israel and the free world. We'll talk about all that in a minute. One more thing to talk about here is, yes, you've got the Hamas rockets now raining down once again. Again, the ceasefire is over. But Palestinian Islamic Jihad, that other Iranian proxy in Gaza now, PIJ, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, has been overlooked a great deal, I believe, since October 7th. They're not as strong as Hamas. Hamas rules the Gaza Strip with an iron fist, but Palestinian Islamic Jihad is also a powerful terror paramilitary organization in its own right, a wholly owned, funded, and armed subsidiary of the Iranian regime. And they work hand in glove with Hamas frequently. And at these hostage releases that we've seen over the past few days, there have been Palestinian Islamic Jihad members present alongside their brothers in Hamas. I say all that to say Palestinian Islamic Jihad claimed responsibility today for rockets that were launched against Jerusalem, the ancient and ancestral capital of the world's one and only Jewish state. So, folks, don't forget that, yes, Israel must crush Hamas, but there are multiple terror organizations, Iran-backed, operating in Gaza right now that must also be decisively defeated so that they can never threaten the world's one and only Jewish state ever again. Palestinian Islamic Jihad is at the top of that list. So Hamas and PIJ need to be crushed by the IDF. And if you had any doubts as to why, you have Palestinian Islamic Jihad firing rockets at Jerusalem today. So the job is clearly not done on the part of the IDF. If, I don't know, you've got hundreds of rockets raining down on central and southern Israel and as far as Jerusalem today, the job's not done. And the job will not be done unless and until Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and these other terror factions in Gaza no longer have the capability to fire rockets into Israel. It sounds like a tall order, but let me tell you, the IDF was well on its way to making this very difficult goal a reality in the run-up to this ceasefire. Now what? What do you think, folks? We've got a very educated, informed audience watching right now. We have thousands with us. We'll have thousands more before we are done on this Friday, December 1st. Let me know what you think. Okay, all bets are off now. Hostilities have commenced. Although the world is gnashing its teeth that Israel is once again going on the offensive. First of all, defending itself from rocket barrages, which Hamas initiated, just as Hamas initiated this entire conflict back on October 7th with the largest, bloodiest, deadliest massacre of the Jewish people since the Holocaust and one of the deadliest terror attacks in modern history. So Hamas initiated this, and Hamas broke the truce, not only with the rocket barrages. As I mentioned, really in Jerusalem yesterday, Hamas broke the truce with that bloody and deadly terror attack that left 4 Israelis dead. Now what? Does Israel pick up where it left off? What do you think? Let me know in the chat here. We've got a very active chat. People from all around the world. Welcome, everyone. What do you think? I believe, listen, according to Israeli leaders, Prime Minister Netanyahu, Israeli military leaders, Chief of Staff, Herzi Halevi, etc., of the IDF, Yoav Gallant, the defense minister, Israel's saying, hey, we're not skipping a beat. We're picking up where we left off, and we're going to finish the job. Amen. God willing. That's what I expect. I think that's what, more importantly, that's what every Israeli expects. Folks, there's a consensus in the land of Israel right now. Remember that political disunity we were talking about not too long ago before October 7th? And Israel, a kingdom divided against itself cannot stand. We said that many times as we were analyzing the situation. Throw that out the window now. When the dust settles, if it settles, that'll be dealt with another day. In the meantime, Israelis of all persuasions, political, every way, are fiercely united in the goal of crushing Hamas. And how couldn't you be? Have we already forgotten? Don't answer that question, because you and I watching, you know the answer. Yes, much of the world has already forgotten what happened on October 7th. And I believe it was October 9th here on the live stream where I said, folks, let me tell you, it's still fresh right now. 1,200 people massacred, babies slaughtered. Yes, babies beheaded. Yes, babies were beheaded. We've got the Hamas apologists and the historical revisionists saying, oh, it never happened. Yes. I don't know how many were beheaded, but there were babies beheaded. We know because rescue workers found their corpses with no heads. I'm sorry to be graphic, but this is no time to mince words. People were beheaded, burned alive, tortured, and raped in front of their family members. Little kids in front of their parents, parents in front of their little kids. It was a demonic, bloody pogrom, a rampage reminiscent of the worst crimes of the Nazis. Hamas are modern day Nazis, only wearing different uniforms, so this shouldn't be a surprise to you. You're shocked by the horror of October 7th? Of course, everyone's shocked. And yet, Hamas announced this with their arrival in 1987 with their founding charter. This is what we want to do. We want to wipe the Jews off the map. The Zionist entity must be eliminated. The Jews must be pushed into the sea. So we're shocked when they they successfully were able to put that agenda, that ideology into action. Folks, I've said it before. I'll say it again. I'm saying it right now. If, say, the 20th century taught you and me anything, the century of Stalin, Mao, Saddam, Hitler, the list goes on, Castro, the North Korean dictatorship, etc., Pol Pot. If the 20th century taught us anything, it's that when evil men tell you they want to kill you, you should listen to them and take them at their word. Don't take them at their word for anything else because they're born liars, these tyrants, these dictators, these murderers. But when they tell you they want to kill you, believe them. Hamas had been telling us for 36 years prior to October 7th exactly what they wanted to do and what they planned to do. Of course, we're shocked and revolted and horrified when it actually happens. But when you take a step back and you observe the past 35 years and Hamas's actions in the run-up to this, remember 2000 to 2006, the second intifada, the Hamas suicide bombers, the list goes on. The terror tunnels, the kidnappings over the years. It's no shock that they did what they did on October 7th. And the world has moved on in large part. It didn't take a brain surgeon to see that this was going to happen. Folks, the world doesn't like it when Jews defend themselves. They prefer Jews and Israelis in particular to be victims. And the Jewish people, they don't have to be victims anymore because of the existence of Israel, the miraculous rebirth of the nation of Israel. So now the Jewish people can fight back. The world doesn't like this. And the world is in a tumult right now. Now that Israel is fighting back and avenging with righteous anger, avenging the atrocities of October 7th, the world doesn't like this very much. I heard one leftist commentator say that David has now become Goliath, calling Israel Goliath and the Palestinians David. I beg to differ, and we'll talk about this more before we're done today. But listen, the sole responsibility for Palestinian civilians right now is in the hands of Hamas for two reasons. Number one, because the Palestinian people elected Hamas to govern them in 2006. After the election in 2007, Hamas completed its violent takeover of the Gaza Strip by expelling the Fatah party of Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas in a bloody coup. But before that, Hamas won the elections the year before. A majority of Palestinians in Gaza voted for Hamas. Hamas is the governing party in Gaza. So first and foremost, as with any entity or nation state, and Gaza is not a nation state, the governing, especially if they were voted upon by the people, their first responsibility is ostensibly to their citizens. Hamas has made clear they could care less. They willfully, folks, the main pillar of Hamas's military strategy is to use civilians as human shields. Wrap your head around this: women, children, the elderly. demonic barbarians, Nazis. So that's what Hamas thinks of its people, quote unquote, that elected it. So that's the number one reason that the main responsibility for civilians in Gaza, and the United States should be transmitting this on a daily basis, and they're not. We'll break that down in a minute. Very troubling signals there. But the second reason is because Hamas launched this war on October 7th. So Hamas bears responsibility for Israel's rightful reaction. You launched a war. And now when the other side that you launched the war against hits back, you don't like it very much. I'm sure the Japanese didn't like it when the U.S. hit back after Pearl Harbor, and I'm sure the Taliban and Al-Qaeda didn't like it when the U.S. hit back after 9/11. But that's how this goes. You're attacked without cause, and you have a right to defend your nation and obtain justice in the aftermath. That's what Israel's doing. So what's the world's reaction to this? The Prime Minister of Spain, the Pope, the U.S. government. We're going to break that down in a minute. And a very troubling visit yesterday by U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken that I need to share with you. The title of this live stream today, part of it, Biden to abandon Israel. I put it out there. And you might say, hey, wait a minute. Biden has had very strong statements in support of Israel since October 7th. He has. The words have, for the most part, been very pro-Israel. Israel needs to finish the job. Hamas is a terror organization, vicious, etc. But are we seeing chinks in that armor? I believe we are. And Antony Blinken yesterday, this was a troubling visit by the U.S. Secretary of State. Actually, I would go so far as to say astonishing. In Israel, they would call it chutzpah, the nerve of what Blinken was laying down and demanding yesterday of a sovereign nation, the nation of Israel, that answers to no other nation, or at least it shouldn't. It's a sovereign democratic nation, a free democracy. But Israel has a problem here, and we're going to break this down in that Israel relies on the United States for a great deal of its armaments and munitions. And I don't know how Israel's going to do it, but Israel now, talk about a wake-up call, is going to need to start producing more of its own arms domestically. It's long overdue. Clearly, the relationship with the U.S. depends on who's in the Oval Office. The degree of support from the U.S. depends on who's in the Oval Office. And it's a tragedy that Israel is fighting this existential war right now, which is going to stretch beyond Gaza. It's going to reach Hezbollah in Lebanon. And by the way, it's going to reach the Iranian regime as well, and perhaps even the Houthis in Yemen. By the way, Hezbollah in Lebanon resumed their firing of rockets and anti-tank missiles today as well. I get the alerts on my phone. The sirens are going off in northern Israel as well along the Lebanon border. So that's recommenced, I should say. Hezbollah observed, quote unquote, this ceasefire over the past week. Now that's out the window, and Israel's fighting on two fronts. And the Houthis are restless to the south. That's a third front in Yemen. This is all happening right now with an administration in Washington, D.C. that is teetering in its support of Israel. You could say, but look what they said publicly. Yes. Look what Blinken said publicly yesterday. We'll break it down in a minute. And look what's being said behind closed doors as Israel is being pressured relentlessly by the U.S. now, not only for a ceasefire, an extended ceasefire that would completely break Israel's momentum and give Hamas new life, but Israel's being told, fight with one hand behind your back, essentially. An impossible task. We'll talk about it in a minute. Before I do, we're talking about the people of Israel in the south and in the north. Listen, folks, some 300,000 Israelis have been displaced from their homes since October 7th. Now, I don't know about you. Sometimes you go on vacation or you're in a hotel for a few days, whatever. By the time it's done, you say, you know what? I want to get back home, in my own bed. I want to be in my own home. These people have not been home in 2 months, and they don't know when they're going back home. They don't know. Would you go home right now? And I've been posing this question throughout the past 2 weeks or so. Would you go home if you lived in the South, which was ravaged and devastated by Hamas on October 7th? It's a ghost town in many sections still along the Gaza border. Or would you go home if you lived along the Lebanon border, if Hamas and Hezbollah were still alive, kicking at full strength, and alive to fight another day? Of course you would. So until Hamas and Hezbollah, especially Hamas, is crushed, and Hezbollah, in the very least, is pushed back a good distance, ideally beyond the Litani River, until and unless that happens, those communities will lie dormant. They will be empty. No one's going back to the Lebanon border to have Hezbollah photograph them, conduct surveillance against them, stare at them across the border, and plan attacks that are many magnitudes more than October 7th. No one's doing that up north, nor should they. It's unsustainable and unacceptable. Hezbollah must be dealt with. The South, it goes without saying, Hamas must be crushed. Now, early on in this war, Benjamin Netanyahu visited the South, and he said this will be a region of revival. Those were his words. To make that a reality, you must crush Hamas. And that's becoming more complicated because of U.S. pressure. But I mentioned those displaced communities. And people are struggling right now in Israel. They're at war. It's a nation of 10 million, some 7 million Jews. The Israeli economy right now, it's tough. Look, folks, a good deal of the Israeli economy depends on tourism. Tourism obviously has come to a screeching halt. Small businesses are struggling. They're suffering. There's uncertainty. Who knows when the other shoe is going to drop? Where's this Hamas war going? Will there be a full-scale war with Hezbollah, with Iran? Where is it all heading? Israel could use a few good friends right now, needless to say. That's why we do what we do here on the Watchman. That's why you're watching right now. But one way that I'm trying to help and advocate for Israel and Israeli small businesses right now and fulfill the biblical mandate, Genesis 12:3, a foundational verse for what we do at the Watchman, to bless Israel, is to support our good friends at ARTSA. Now, we've told you about Meir Panim, another great organization. I also want to highlight ARTSA. I've been working with ARTSA for years, and what they do is they put together these incredible, high-quality artisan boxes filled with incredible products made by Israeli businesses, handmade in Israel by Israelis in places like Jerusalem, Bethlehem, Nazareth, and beyond, the Galilee, the Golan, and the Negev. In the Holy Land, these are handmade. Awesome products straight from the Holy Land. Number one, maybe you've never been to Israel and you want to get there. It's your dream. Number two, maybe you've wanted to go. You can't go back. It's obviously kind of difficult to go right now with everything going on. This is the closest you will get. I tell people, an ARTSA box. It's the real deal. I'm in Israel all the time. You know that if you watch me. It's my second home. These are real, high-quality, Israeli-made products made with tender loving care by Israelis. Artzabox.com. You see the information there on your screen, ARTZAbox.com. Hey, Christmas around the corner, Hanukkah around the corner. Great gift for the Israel lover in your home. And you are supporting, you're fulfilling that biblical mandate to bless Israel, and you're supporting a great Israeli small business. The owner of this business is in the Israeli reserves. He's not far from the front lines right now. I'll just say that. These are good people. It's a great product. Watchman 18 is the discount code. That's MAN, Watchman 18. Artzabox.com. Use that discount code. Get 18% off your ARTSA box subscription. Great stuff. Check them out and support a great Israeli small business at a time where they truly, truly need it. Support for Israel. You know, it could be a fleeting thing among some, it seems, where one day, I say 1 week, the immediate aftermath of the October 7th massacre, we have the Biden administration all in and saying Israel needs to do what it needs to do. Hamas can no longer run Gaza or be a presence or a threat there. It all sounded great, sounded words. And there have even been press conferences. John Kirby, the White House spokesman, people have said some of these quote unquote reporters in the press room have said, do you believe Israel is committing genocide against the Palestinians? John Kirby, to his credit, I haven't had much to praise over the years in that role for him, but I give credit where it's due. He scoffed at them and said, no, it's Hamas that attempted genocide against Israel. They're a genocidal organization. You're looking at the wrong party here. All sounded great. But again, words. And look, the U.S. has been replenishing Israeli armaments as well since October 7th. But is there a shelf life to that support? And I'm not the only one asking it. The U.S. pushed and pushed and pushed some more for the ceasefire. They got it. And look, good came out of it. Look, we had dozens and dozens of Israelis, women, children released. Who isn't praising God for that when the captives are freed from a barbaric death cult hell in these tunnels under Gaza? I don't think anyone watching right now was upset about that. We all celebrate the release of the hostages. But on the flip side, what a difficult situation, knowing this gives Hamas time to regroup. What a decision that Israeli leaders have to make. Pray for them, folks, to have spines of steel, in particular to resist international pressure. In particular, I'm sad to say, as a proud American, U.S. pressure. And that's the truth. Anthony Blinken yesterday, I talked about a shelf life on Israel's offensive in Gaza. Anthony Blinken, the Secretary of State, yesterday met with the Israeli War Cabinet, literally in Israel's War Cabinet meetings, which is for a sovereign nation to allow an official from another nation into their War Cabinet meetings doesn't seem quite right to me. But Blinken afterwards laid out a bunch of demands in a press conference and said Israel must, if they resume their offensive in Gaza, they must do everything they can to protect Gazan civilians. I'm paraphrasing now. He went into some detail on this, what Israel must do. The casualties are too high. Israel must do X, Y, and Z and fight with greater precision. Listen, you have over 1 million people, 2 million, 3 million crammed in the tiny Gaza Strip. Israel goes to extraordinary lengths to avoid civilian casualties, to the point where Israel, I've called it the most humane, the Israel Defense Forces, the most humane fighting force in world history. That's not an understatement. I say that without hesitation. They're being held, are the Israel Defense Forces, to an impossible standard by the United States. Basically saying, okay, destroy Hamas, and basically no civilians can be killed in your effort. Essentially what they're saying, read between the lines, even though Hamas uses civilians as human shields and uses kindergartens and playgrounds and schools and hospitals as command and control centers and rocket launching pads. As usual, this administration is making every last demand of Israel and none from Hamas. Why isn't Blinken calling on Hamas to protect Palestinian civilians, to not use Palestinian civilians as human shields? Hamas is the elected governing body in Gaza. The responsibility for the civilians of Gaza, their safety, depends first and foremost on Hamas. But then Hamas decided to launch a war and a massacre on October 7th. But Israel is being held to an impossible standard, and the Biden administration is going to pressure Israel to wrap this offensive up sooner rather than later. Here's the problem with that, and Israeli leaders have made this clear. This is probably not a short-term campaign in Gaza. It's going to take a while to root out these terrorists from their rat holes and their tunnels that they've dug some 300 miles of beneath the Gaza Strip. It's going to take a while. And folks, guess what? Even after the official end of hostilities, after Hamas as a military force is crushed in Gaza, that's not going to be the end of it for a few reasons. Number one, because Israel has vowed to eliminate every last Hamas leader wherever they are in the world. That could be 5 years from now even. Think of the aftermath of the Munich massacre in 1972, the Olympic massacre. Israel methodically hunted down every one of those terrorists and killed them. Secondly, Israel wants an absolute new reality in Gaza, meaning a buffer zone is a possibility as well. A buffer zone separating Israel from Gaza, a considerable buffer zone. There's been discussions of Saudi Arabia and the UAE and Sunni Arab nations getting involved in the post-war Gaza Strip. We shall see. But the U.S., again, adamant. The thing that has struck me about this administration in D.C. is that when it comes to talk of a Palestinian state and a Palestinian presence in Gaza, etc., they've been even more adamant and vociferous than Arab nations have. Look, I hear Arab nations, Arab leaders, paying I call it lip service to a Palestinian state and a two-state solution. Their main concern is the Iranian regime and that threat. The leaders of Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Egypt, the UAE, Bahrain, etc., the nations that have relations with Israel, the Abraham Accords nations, folks, trust me, I've met with these people. I've met with the officials. They're far more concerned about the Iranian regime and Hezbollah than they are a Palestinian state. The order of priority is to weaken Iran and Hezbollah by extension. If a Palestinian state comes, they say, great, well, and they pay lip service for the Arab street and their citizens, and they talk about it. But their main priority and main concern is Iran. And when Israel takes action against Iran and its proxies, the Sunni Arab world secretly, for the most part, applauds. Because they all fear, and I do mean fear, that looming Shia superpower in the form of the Iranian regime, which is well on its way to having nuclear weapons. They fear the looming specter of a nuclear Iran. Why do you think Saudi Arabia was on the precipice of making peace with Israel before October 7th? And one of the reasons Hamas launched that attack, absolutely, this had to factor in the timing. At the behest of their masters in Tehran, Hamas acted. And the Saudis in March, we talked about this in great detail here in the newscast, had a rapprochement with the Iranian regime. After 7 years of no relations, all of a sudden they renewed diplomatic relations. Why? For the Saudis, it was a non-aggression pact. Not because they see eye to eye with Iran, but essentially the Saudis looked at Israel and said, wow, there's so much disunity in Israel right now. They looked at the U.S. and saw disarray completely in the leadership, so-called. And they said, man, if we can't count on the U.S. and we can't count on Israel, we're isolated and alone in the face of Iran, a growing, powerful Iranian regime and its proxies. I don't want to say it's if you can't beat them, join them, because the Saudis didn't join with Iran. But again, non-aggression pact. You don't attack us, we don't attack you. That was the thinking. Every foreign policy move the Saudis make, and most Sunni Arab nations right now, is with the Iranian regime and its growing arc across the region in mind. It's the main reason the Abraham Accords peace treaties happened, folks. The UAE and Bahrain, very close proximity to Iran, of course, right across the Gulf. The main reason for the Abraham Accords, and there were many reasons, but the main reason, Iran. Solidarity against the Iranian regime. Israel finds itself aligned with these Sunni Arab nations against the Iranian axis. What is that axis? Iran, the Assad regime in Syria, Hezbollah, the Houthis, Islamic Jihad, Hamas, etc. The Shia militias in Iraq and Syria. Hey, Israel is not only encircled by an Iranian ring of fire. Saudi Arabia is also encircled. Jordan is also encircled. Pull out a map. The Saudis have the Houthis to the south, the Shia militias to the north, and Iran to the east. This is a geopolitical chess match in the region right now, and the prophetic chess pieces are moving on the board here. We've got sheep nations and goat nations, I believe, lining up. Where will the United States fall in that calculus? Where is this heading? Is there going to be calls, open calls eventually from the Biden administration if this thing stretches on? And again, Israeli leaders were adamant, as Blinken was there yesterday. They said, look, we're going to finish the job. And I've said it before, I'll say it again. Others have said it as well. If this current government in Israel does not finish the job of crushing Hamas, they're done. There will be a new government in Israel. No doubt. The sentiment in Israel is that strong. And the sentiment for its leaders to stiffen their spines and resist international pressure and, yes, U.S. pressure. It's going to increase. Blinken, the audacity, tough to stomach. As an American, especially, tough to stomach. The United States Secretary of State making these demands of Israel, which was attacked. How would we have responded in the United States to such demands after Pearl Harbor, after 9/11? You must, I'm sorry. I don't know, in Afghanistan and Japan and elsewhere in Iraq, etc. Hey, there were civilian casualties. Was Israel lecturing the United States about it? War is ugly, nasty business. No one wants to see any civilian casualties. But sadly, when evil actors like Hamas or Al-Qaeda on 9/11, the Taliban, attack you and then use innocent civilians as human shields when you respond, then it becomes a much trickier proposition, needless to say. Blinken knows that, and yet he's holding Israel to an impossible standard here. It's sad to see, and it's going to intensify. The Spanish prime minister, who I mentioned at the top, saying essentially that he doesn't believe that Israel is following international law right now in Gaza. Israel recalled its ambassador from Spain, or the Spanish ambassador to Israel, to give him a dressing down and lecture him. The Pope reportedly, I don't know if this was verified, but there were reports saying that he accused Israel of responding to terror with terror. Now, again, these were reports. I haven't seen an ironclad statement that, yes, this is what he said. But many times with this Pope, there's a lack of clarity. Let's just say that. When it comes to his public statements, there's a lot of walkbacks from his team. So I'd like to know more about that. That's troubling, to say the least. But that's par for the course right now among world leaders on college campuses. The public relations tide. Hey, look, in the United States, the Christmas tree lighting ceremony the other night at Rockefeller Center, New York City, was pro-Hamas demonstrators attempted to storm it. Now, that's a Christian, obviously Christmas, it's a Christian ceremony. Not that in New York City there were crosses and the celebration of the birth of Jesus, but it gets to the crux of things. There's an old saying in the world of radical Islam: first the Saturday people, the Jews, then the Sunday people, the Christians. So, closing thought here: if you're watching this, you're saying, hey, tough break for the Jews, tough break for Israel. Wow, but I'm not Jewish, I'm not Israeli, and I live thousands of miles away, let them fight it out. It's not that easy. Does anyone watching right now really think that if the Iranian regime, Hamas, Hezbollah, etc., got their way and wiped the Zionist entity, as they call it, off the map, that they would pack up their bags and go home? They'd say, our work is done here. We're done. Let's get serious. Where would they turn their attention to next? It's not alarmism. It's not sensationalism. There's historical precedent. When the jihadist armies roared out of the Arabian Peninsula in the 7th century, there was no nation state called Israel at that time. Always a Jewish presence in the land. But after the Bar Kokhba revolt in 132 AD, the majority of the Jewish people were dispersed from their God-given homeland. So at that time in the 7th century, there was no official nation state of Israel, miraculously reborn, of course, in 1948. But if the jihad is all about Israel, and there was no Israel at that time, at least officially, how did the armies that roared out of the Arabian Peninsula conquer a good chunk of Europe, drive to central France before being turned back by Charles Martel, eventually drive to the gates of Vienna twice, conquer North Africa, which had previously been Christian, drive as far as India, When all that happened, those great jihadist conquests, folks, there was no nation state called Israel. So what makes you think that if there, and we've read to the back of the book, that book is the Bible. This is news from a Christian perspective. What makes you think that if Israel disappeared from the map, that they would stop there, the jihadists? They wouldn't. That's a wake-up call as we head into the weekend in terms of the stakes. These are the stakes. Keep it all in prayer. You might say, oh, here he's just saying pray. Prayer works. I've seen it in my life. I've seen it writ large. Continue, and you're mandated, if you are a follower of Jesus like myself, you are mandated to pray for the peace of Jerusalem, the entire nation of Israel, and to bless the nation of Israel. I love what God loves. He loves that land, and he has a title deed to the land of Israel and the city of Jerusalem, bar none. Keep it all in prayer. God is still on the throne. He observes these enemies hatching plots against Israel, and the book of Psalms says he quite literally laughs. And where does this all end for the enemies of Israel? And we talked about this on the live stream yesterday. If you missed any of our live streams, homepage right there in the archives. Check out the book of Joel, chapter 3, verse 2. All nations on a day of judgment will be brought down to the valley of Jehoshaphat in Jerusalem. It's a valley within the valley. It's within the Kidron Valley. I've been there many times. And God says, there in Jerusalem, I will judge them, the nations, for how they treated Israel, because they have scattered my people and divided up my land. Book of Joel, chapter 3, verse 2. That's some homework for you over the weekend. Check it out. What I consider one of the most important prophetic passages related to Israel and largely overlooked. Take heart. God is in control. Thanks so much for joining us here today on the Watchman Newscast live stream. Until next time, God bless you. And remember, never hold your peace. Hey everyone, thanks for checking out the Watchman Newscast. Make sure you hit the subscribe button so you never miss an upload, and tap the bell icon so you're notified every time a new video is posted. And don't forget to share your thoughts, insights, and comments below. Thanks for watching. We'll see you back here tomorrow.